We're live, guys. This is the Maverick Times podcast, episode number 87. Uh, tonight's guest chose a path most people never would. When many attorneys leave law school chasing big law firms, bigger checks, and bigger cities, he went in the opposite direction. He went where the need was the greatest. David Silberthau went to law school with a mission to represent the people who could not afford an attorney. Not the powerful, not the connected. The people who otherwise might have stood alone against this justice system. His legal career began in rural Texas with the Texas Rio Grande Public Defender's Office in Beeville. There, he handled felony and misdemeanor cases across South Texas. And he didn't just show up, he fought, securing not guilty verdicts in counties that had not seen one in years, taking constitutional challenges all the way into Texas appellate courts, representing clients throughout Beeville, Refugio, Live Oak, McMullen, Duval, Starr, and Lavaca counties. Today he serves as the executive director of the Texas Rio Grande Public Defenders, an organization that has transformed indigent defense across South Texas and is now helping bring public defender services to communities like Maverick County. But for many residents, the justice system is just something they only think about when something goes wrong. But tonight, we're talking about constitutional rights. We're talking about the right to access to justice. We're talking about what happens when someone cannot afford an attorney. And we're talking about matters that every taxpayer, every family, and every resident of Maverick County. This is David Silberthau, and the conversation starts now. David.
Hello.
Hi,
Isaac. Thank you for that introduction. That's definitely the best introduction I've ever gotten. So I was very excited listening to it. I was like, that sounds pretty cool. Thank you for that, man. It means a lot.
we try, right? Thank you, man, for showing up. I know many people may not be familiar with you just yet entering the community. You've been here for months. I know that myself. But, many people might have seen you in Commissioner's
Sure.
Court there in Maverick County, maybe walking around the courthouses. But we're glad you accepted our invitation to come on here, but because I think you represent something much larger that no one knows what actually is happening. So that's why we wanted to have you on, and we thank you. I don't know if you want to give a shout out to anybody right now while we're here before we get started off on the.
Oh, no. Well, thank you for having me, for one, and I'm really excited to be able to speak a little bit about what we're doing and what the organization does, what we're hoping to do, and I've started doing already in Maverick, Dimmitt, and Zavala counties, and across the whole state. I completely agree that I think this is not something that a lot of people think about necessarily, but it affects. It really does affect everybody, both from a dollars and cents perspective, and also the fact that, but for the grace of God, go I. It is. No one thinks that they're going to end up facing the prosecutorial power of the state until they are. And so, anyway, I'm really excited about that. I'll just shout out anyone who is watching from my neck of the woods, which is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, originally. I don't know who's on, but to anybody who is, shout out to friends or family. But let's get into it, man.
Philadelphia, that's a long way from home there, David.
Yeah, it is, but I've come to know Eagle Pass quite well. It is a long way from home.
So let's jump right in. David, what was it that inspired you to become an attorney?
So I went to law school a little bit after I went to college. I graduated college, and I originally actually went to work in the film industry. To work in the film industry in New York City. Yeah, so I worked for a company. We made independent film product, like indie films. So having said that, I was always very interested in public service and storytelling. At the same time, these sort of two things were I was constantly kind of going back and forth on. Like in college, I was doing all the student theater, and I was, in plays and writing and directing and stuff, plays and things like that. And then my internships were all very in politics, like working for politicians and things of that nature, because I was interested in service. And when I graduated college, I thought, well, there's two options. I could kind of do this public service sort of thing, or I could go try to be an artist. And I thought, well, I was 21. I didn't have a, mortgage. So I was like, I'll try the one that seems riskier. So I went to go work in the film industry. Um, and about a year in, we were working on a project that was being filmed in an active maximum security prison. And so, yeah, it was interesting. So the project, it was not a documentary. It was like a fictional film, like a feature length film. You can go see it. It's called The OG. It's on HBO, I think. And we were working on this project, and the premise was, right. There was all these people who, like most of the actors, the vast, other than the lead, the main lead was a professional actor, but the rest of them were like in prison and serving sentences, and they were also the actors in the film. And as we were doing this movie, I realized I was much more drawn to the fact that we were like filming this film in a prison, and how it was affecting a lot of these actors' lives. And after it, um, like the filming wrapped, and I remember we got a letter from the co-star in the film, and he was like 29, something like that, and had been was serving a significant sentence. I think I forget the exact charge, but it was a serious charge. It was like a burglary that had gone wrong, and I think he had shot somebody. He was serving like 30, 40 years, and he was someone he'd grown up poor. He's from a bad part of Indianapolis. The prison was in Indiana, and he sent this letter, and the letter was basically describing how until this film, he felt like he never had been able to just tell his story. He didn't think anybody was listening to him, had ever really heard anything about his background, who he was, his humanity, and that this was the first time he felt like he could really represent himself and represent who he was and express himself. And I was sitting there in this office, and I remember just being completely much more moved by the experience of having that impact on somebody's life than really the film industry, which could be a kind of fickle place. And that's really, I would say, was I mean, that was kind of the turning point. It was at that point that I really started thinking about going to law school to become a public defender, and kind of went from there. Took the LC. It's a process. You got to take a test. You got to this that. But that was, I would say, that was a kind of a significant moment in terms of really thinking about um, this work, because to me, and it still is this, it's this marriage of service work and representing people that it's a sacred right to represent somebody when they can't afford a lawyer, and to be their champion in those circumstances, and to marry that with the storytelling aspect of what this job is, of what really a lot of yeah, which is telling somebody's story and translating their humanity to a system that is not necessarily looking to see it otherwise.
No, yeah, that's great. I mean, it's kind of like I said. I think a lot of attorneys tend to choose the private sector because I mean, in legal pass specifically, you see all these injury lawyers, and I'm assuming that's where Mike made the millions and millions of dollars, right? And I'm just going
Yeah,
based on the ads. So
yeah.
when you're defending people, I mean, especially indigent people, you're not expecting that. You're doing that because that's what you like to do.
Yeah, yeah, that is right. I am not doing it for the it's not, no, it's not a job you're going to get rich for. I mean, to me, it's similar to prosecutor or any kind of public service job, which is that you're trying to like, to understand why someone would, I think, be interested in this and why it's important, is to go back to like the importance of what this right is. And the right to have an attorney when you're facing down the barrel of the state trying to take away your life and liberty, and and all of that is sacred. It's in the Sixth Amendment. It's in fact, I like to say we're the only constitutional lawyers. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you need to have a prosecutor. It does say in the Constitution that you are entitled to an attorney no matter what. And the reason of course for that is so important because if you don't give someone that right, then who's to stop the government from just being able to willy-nilly taking whatever they want whenever they want? And it's sometimes I think I think sometimes we think, oh, the government would never do that. They would never act that way. But we think back to our founders. I mean, they fought an oppressive government. And I think that we've, I don't want to kind of get too into politics, but we've gone through many periods of this in the history of this country where the government sometimes isn't acting in a great way. And to make sure that there's no matter what, no matter who's in charge, and no matter who they're going after, there's a protection, there's guarantees. That's what separates us from a totalitarian country, from a country where again everything is contingent. You can just take whatever you want whenever you want. So I'm very passionate about the work, and yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you've probably heard me get on my soapbox a few times.
Well, let's take a little bit of a step back.
Sure.
For someone that has never been involved in the criminal justice system at all, what exactly is a public defender?
Yeah, no, thanks. So, public defender, what we are is if you're arrested for a crime and you are entitled to a lawyer, no matter what. That's what that's in the Constitution, Sixth Amendment, as I was just describing, which is Bill of Rights. So that's like sacred. We're talking OG 1789 or 91, whenever the Constitution was ratified, right? This goes back to the founding, and so you're entitled to an attorney, no matter if you can afford one or not. And so a public defender is an attorney that is full time doing that work. That's their job, is to take cases when folks cannot afford lawyers and need them in their criminal cases.
And so, what's the biggest misconception you've come upon with being a public defender?
Oh man, so many, all of them. I mean, look, this is not a prestigious job. This is a job that usually has as little cultural cachet and political cachet as you could think of, right? And that comes from all sides. So, I think from sometimes your clients are mistrustful of you, and I don't blame them because, for one, and this is something that I think of all the time, if I was in their shoes, if you're facing a criminal charge, right, and it could be significant, right, it could be kind of something that could carry a prison sentence if you're convicted. And you don't even get to choose who is the person who's supposed to be representing you and representing your best interests when you're facing that. That just creates such a trust deficit, right? Even if you let's say you hire a lawyer and you hire the worst lawyer, they're terrible, but you get the chance to at least go into someone's office and pay them. There's a sense of agency that you just get with that process, with just being able to have the choice to say, I got to choose who's going to be with me in the corner. We don't get to do that. We don't choose our clients, and our clients don't choose us. And again, to me, that's sacred. That's one of the really honors of this work. But it also means, at a personal level, when you walk into a room, you have to understand that the person who you're sitting across from might be looking at you like, really? Do I really trust this person? And then that kind of that I think feeds into some of the social stereotypes, right, of public defenders. One of my favorite films is My Cousin Vinny. Excellent film. A lot of lawyers love that movie, but the public defender of that movie does not give us a good name. If anyone watching recalls it, he kind of has that like stutter where as soon as he actually seems like he has it together, and then he gets up in his opening argument and goes, and it's miserable, right? And the scene ends with Vinny's like. Co-defendant getting up and says, I want that guy, right? Or not Vinny, the defendant. Who's not Vinny, who's the main character. But the bottom line is that the perception of public defenders is usually, because it's not well paid, that they couldn't get another job, right? Oh, you probably couldn't get another job, and then it doesn't have, I think, the prestige that prosecution has because there's, I think, a long line of stories in the media about what prosecution is, right? Which is locking away bad guys. And then public defenders or defense attorneys who are like, sleazy, trying to get people off, or they're just trying to get someone off on a technicality. And so you kind of, the most, one of the most common questions I get, is, how could you represent somebody who, and then you kind of fill in the blank of the worst crime that they could think of, right? How could you represent that person? Um, and and I think the misconception is that that is the lion's share of what this work is. It's like, I think the thought in the public is that every case is like this heinous offense, and that is so far from reality. I'm not going to sit here and say you never get a case that is gnarly. You do. I mean, that's part of what the job is. You have to represent everybody, but and you have to represent everybody zealously. But that's not what our system is. Our system is mostly representing poor people, or sorry, prosecuting poor people. 70 to 80% of people who are prosecuted cannot afford lawyers. So we're not talking about a small percentage. We're talking about the system is a system of people who cannot afford attorneys. And it's mostly prosecuting nonviolent offenses, drug possession charges for personal use. We're talking less than a gram of methamphetamine. I was just looking this today. We got appointed to, of 6 cases we got appointed to today, 4 of them are less than a gram possession of methamphetamine. I have, I'm not saying, and I don't know if they're, obviously we don't know if they're innocent or if they did it, but my point is that's the lion's share of the kind of charges we're talking about, where you have somebody who has a substance abuse problem, if at worst, if they did it, if they're guilty, and, who can't afford a lawyer. And, I will just say, I think there's something very rich. I went to law school where 90% of my class is working in big law, and I will tell you right now, that there are a lot of big law lawyers that are doing cocaine in bathrooms because that's and they're never getting prosecuted. You know what I mean? The only reason why my clients get prosecuted is because they're too poor to have a license plate, with a valid registration, or a brake light's out, or they drive a beater of a car, and so they get pulled over. And is that fair? Is that just? Do I have any moral issues representing that person? No. Like the person who just can't, happened. Like I don't. And so, and again, that's really what we're talking about. I think that I'll just end it. Again, I could kind of go on and on, but people always ask, again, defense attorneys, how could you represent somebody who did this, or that? People never ask prosecutors, how could you try to put someone in prison for, a small amount of drugs, or how could you go to sleep at night if you convict someone that was actually innocent? And that's a hazard of the job of being a prosecutor. I don't dislike prosecutors. Prosecutors are an important part of the system. Obviously, we need both sides, but there's hazard to all sides of this position, to all sides of the work that we do. It's messy. We're talking about a system that is trying to adjudicate behaviors that are antisocial, fundamentally, and so it's a messy system, no matter what side you're on. And the importance of having both sides and doing it zealously is I think the critical thing, because you don't have a functioning system without it. So I guess that was a lot of misperceptions, but I think that the biggest one would be that the people who are doing this work aren't there because they choose to be, maybe, and because ultimately that's what, for the organization that we run and what I do, we do at Texas Rio Grande Public Defender, and the people that I bring on my team, that's the most important part about every. They always say, what are you looking for? The thing I'm looking for is, do you care about this work, and do you have a heart for this work? If you have a heart for this work, that is the fundamentally most important thing. You do not want. I will not hire you if you're doing this for the money, because there's not enough money to make this job worth it. There's not. It's decent, but if you want money, you should go be a billboard lawyer.
Well, why should taxpayers even care about whether someone is being represented or receives competent legal representation?
Yeah, they shouldn't, Isaac. Let's go home. No, I'm kidding. No, why should they care? So I think there's a few answers to this question. My answer is because it's like, this is fundamentally what it means to be a democratic society, is what do you give to the people who would have nothing? I think that is like that I think that defines what kind of a world and we live in, and what we care about more than anything else. Again, how you treat those that you're trying to put in prison is in some ways again, to me, that's such an important definition for what our society generally, how democratic we are, how free we are. Because if you don't give those people anything, then what's to stop the government from labeling somebody else undesirable and putting them in prison, right? That's one thing. There's also a dollars and cents thing aspect to this. So, you know, I can share a little bit about Maverick County, and that it actually ends up costing Maverick County a lot more money when you don't provide effective counsel, because ultimately this is a constitutional right. It has to be provided. You can get sued if you're not, and there's counties that haven't. Maverick has not been, but I mean, like, generally there's been lawsuits when that doesn't come out. So there's a constitutional right, and there's laws in Texas that say how long you can stay in jail, for instance, when you've been arrested before you've been formally charged. So, if you don't have an attorney, if there's not a representation being given to people who are arrested and are sitting in jail, but they haven't yet been charged, that might be a little, I'll kind of just back up quickly. There's sort of two steps. You know, let's say you're arrested on the street because the cop thinks you did something illegal. You're sitting in the jail, you have a bond set. The next step in the criminal process is that the prosecutor, the attorney who is going to decide, you know, who represents the state of Texas, has to decide whether or not they want to officially go forward with those charges. There's a certain amount of time that they have to choose to do that. If they don't do it within that amount of time, then if you're sitting in jail, you've got to be let out of jail. And so for like a misdemeanor, for instance, a Class A misdemeanor, driving while intoxicated, it could be 30 days in jail that you can sit. So you can maximally sit 30 days in jail, and then the prosecutor has to decide if they're going forward or not with the charge. When someone doesn't have a lawyer, we've seen this in Maverick County, they're not released at that 30-day mark. They're released maybe at the 60-day mark, maybe the 90-day mark. There was somebody who we recently found who'd been sitting in jail for 132 days. He should have been released at the 30-day mark. That's not great. You're making a face. But I mean, from a dollars and cents perspective, that also costs the county a lot of money, because jail is not actually cheap. You got food, you have medical expenses, you got to clothe them. I think Judge Abascal is one of the district court judges in Maverick County. He testified in Commissioner's Court that it's about $74 a day to house somebody at the jail. From the numbers we've collected, and this does not certainly include everything, but in the last year, we estimate that there's been at least about $218,000 in costs just for over detention. So these are people that should have, under the law, been out of jail, but weren't, and because they didn't have a lawyer or they didn't have and this is not even a difficult legal issue. This is a very simple. You just file a motion that says they've been there for 30 days and been, no charges in the press, release them. This is like not even difficult legal work, but you still need somebody. You need an advocate. You need somebody who's paying attention, right? Who's representing that person and can make sure that they're not being lost in this, slipping through the cracks. Because that's really right, to have an advocate, to have a lawyer, make sure that nobody is slipping through the cracks, no matter what. That this is like fundamental to what the safety net is. And it is I think that the data is bearing it out, that it isn't just the right thing to do from a humanitarian perspective, but it also ends up actually saving money, which I think every taxpayer probably cares about too.
No, yeah, that was a question we were going to ask. There is it saving money, or is it creating additional costs? Mm-hmm. Now, I believe you guys came in on some funding through the Texas Indigent Defense Commission. Mm-hmm. So a big portion of your first year here is going to be taken care of by the state funds, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So the way we're funded, the way the state has a standing, the state of Texas has a kind of a pretty good standing deal with rural counties in particular. It's important. The state has really made a priority, actually, of increasing public defense across rural areas, and so they have a standing sort of deal to highly subsidize, highly fund rural public defender offices, and the counties chip in a small amount, but the majority of it is funded by the state. The first year, the vast majority, and it goes down a little bit, but it's still the majority of the funding is funded by the state. So it always, basically, the lowest it kind of ever goes, and it doesn't always go this low, but the lowest ever goes is the state is funding 2/3 of the cost. So essentially, the county's dollar is tripled, right? $1 spent is actually $3 spent. And, that you kind of only get that deal from the state if you have a public defender's office, because that's actually the state of Texas's position, right? Like the government of the state of Texas appreciates the importance of having consistent, quality, zealous representation, um, and so they've kind of have this strong financial incentive. So there's kind of, in addition to that sort of big match, right? There's also the amount of, I think, jail costs you end up saving too, which is something that I kind of learned as we've started to collect that data. I mean, the last thing I'll say, just to kind of give you a little. So we talked about money. The average amount of time that somebody sat longer than they should have on a misdemeanor in Maverick County over the last year, when there wasn't a public defender, was 70 days. So they should have been sitting for a maximum of 30, and they were sitting for an average of 100 days. And for a felony, they should have been sitting for a maximum of 90, and the average was 150 days. And that's time that nobody gets back. I mean, it's just sitting in jail for no good reason. So to me, that should make everybody, uh, a little bit uneasy.
Well, I mean, there was a an article not too long ago in what was it, the New York Times?
Yep.
Yeah, New York Times, that spoke about a gentleman that had been sitting in the jail for way more than he should have. And I think
Hmm.
that you guys kind of jumped in after that, at least from what I've heard, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. No, the county, I mean, I think that the county has definitely made a lot of efforts to, I mean, that's why we're here ultimately. I think that, I mean, I don't know the full story. I was, because we weren't here just yet, but my understanding is that article came out and there was a real effort and a push to get a public defender's office shortly after that. And so I'm excited that we're obviously, or, I kind of gave the bad news of here's how much it has cost in the past, but the point, right, is that we're here, our office is operational. We're staffing up to six full-time attorneys right now. We're at two. So we're getting there slowly. We just started a few months ago. um, and, uh, and investigators, paralegals, caseworker. So it's a robust and well-resourced office. And I'm happy to say that we've been in the jails a lot, and the jail a lot, and making sure that this kind of thing is not happening, or if it is, it won't for very much longer.
No, I mean, actually, I did hear a comment by the sheriff's office. They mentioned that they were kind of surprised of how fast you guys are working with the jail, with the inmates, or the people that are being accused there at the jail. That you guys are kind of working rather quickly and saving space in the jail, which of course space is money for any jail
Hmm.
out here. I mean, not just in Maverick County, right? Any jail anywhere, space is money for them to use.
Yep. Yep. It's funny because, Isaac, I'll be honest with you. I did not become a public defender to create jail space and generate county revenue for a jail. That wasn't what was on my bingo card. But look, you have to be realistic for showing the benefits to any county for why this is important. And I am very cognizant that, listen, this costs the county money to have people sit there, and it is also in our interest as a public defender's office to get people out of jail who shouldn't be sitting there. So it's a win-win, And I think that, to me, it kind of is like one of those things where the stars align, where you realize that, like, the right thing to do is actually also the cost-effective thing to do, which is kind of nice when that happens. And it's I think it speaks volumes that a sheriff's department, which many may not think would be a strong advocate for a public defender's office, because it's like the other side, but they've been some of the strongest advocates. I've met with they've been very, very friendly and welcoming, and I've met with the sheriff and the first, sort of his first, assistant, his second in command, many times, and they've discussed that their excitement to have us here, because ultimately nobody wants people sitting in the jail when they shouldn't be in the jail. Nobody really wants that, and nobody wants to be in a system that isn't working properly, where rights aren't being protected. And so I think there's a real appreciation that that's what we're doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you represented clients all through South Texas. What
Hmm.
have you learned that rural communities that larger cities tend to overlook?
Mm. That's a great question. I've, yeah, and especially again. I mean, I'm from outside of Philadelphia. I myself was a city slicker before I came down to Texas, so I had to I had to learn yeah. So it wasn't in my background, but at this point, I think I have a decent read on what rural practice looks like. You know, it's much more personal, and there's pros and there's cons to that. Ultimately, you're dealing with far fewer people, and you're not dealing with that sort of a department or a system. You're dealing with like what I mean by that is, let's say you've got to go deal with the prosecutor's office. I mean, you have to go talk to the prosecutor's office. You're not dealing with like one of 100 lawyers. You're dealing with one of three or four that you know pretty well at this point. Or same with the probation department or the clerks or even just people in the community that you might see around. And that means that relationships matter, probably more so than in cities. You can't just kind of burn bridges and not think about what the consequences of that would be. And it leads to, I think, a kind of a more tight knit sort of system. I think that the pros of that are that there can be a trust established and developed that can really be beneficial to clients and to the way that the system operates. And I think that the cost of that are that when you have a personal relationship, you need to make sure that you're always having your client as number one, and you're not kind of thinking, oh, is that going to piss off this person that I'm going to see the next day? And that's something that you just always have to think about. Um, the other thing, about rural practice, and this kind of goes for attorneys, but you get to do a lot more interesting work a lot earlier in your career, because there's not otherwise a ton of resources, and so there you kind of get to, yeah, you're not like, again, things aren't going to be shipped off to that other department over here. It's like if you're in the office, you're going to be working. I mean, we had a lawyer start on Monday. I mentioned we have two lawyers now. We have a lawyer start on Monday. He's getting a very good trial by fire experience, because that's what it is. And there's people who are really game for that kind of work. I was. For them, it's just like there's no better experience, because you get in the thick of it early, and you learn so much so fast. And the work is really, I think, directly impactful. You really see it, right? Because again, everything is just smaller. So you kind of see how what you're doing is impacting a system, and even change is also, you can make change in a much quicker way, right? It's like I always like to talk about, or sort of a way I think about it is like, it's way easier to turn around like a sailboat, than a cruise ship. Cruise ship, you got, it's like, right, it's like whatever, a few 100 million tons. I don't even know how big they are, but it takes miles to turn those around. A little sailboat, you kind of just tack away, and like that's the thing, because you're not dealing with systems that you have to change. You're just dealing with people, and I think that's a really exciting prospect with rural practice.
Can you share a case that maybe change your perspective on how justice is in our country or in Texas?
Hmm. Hmm. That's a good question. One case. Wow. I will tell you the first thing that comes. Yeah. I think that there's a sad one and there's a happy one. Um, and I think that ultimately this work. I'll share the happy one, because sad one, I don't want to get people down. But I think that my first year of practice, I was in a jurisdiction that was really hostile to litigating. And this is a little bit, you referenced it a little bit in your introduction. There hadn't been a jury trial in 19 years in this county. Um, and so everyone was just pleading. And that was a function that there hadn't really been, I think, attorneys that were really, uh, fighting and representing their clients. And even my first day in that court, I remember there was a lawyer sitting next to me who was not a public defender. He was there just, and he was kind of, first day, he was telling me war stories, and he was saying how when he got out of law school, he went to go get appointments, court appointments, and he was trying to make a living and all that, and so he went to the judge's office every day and gave him his favorite bottle of cognac, uh, who was making the appointments, and the judge gave him 10 extremely serious charges, which means 10 cases that you can bill significantly higher right out of law school, which I think shows you kind of some of the issues. That's not the story. The story, that's just kind of preamble to this jurisdiction. So in this jurisdiction, though, it's misdemeanor court. And I ended up going to, there were some cases that have been sitting for 3 or 4 years, just misdemeanors, and they hadn't been resolved. And we're talking about possession of marijuana less than 2 ounces. So like if someone had like a little joint in their car, the first trial that I had, which was actually a legal permanent resident who didn't speak English, and he was arrested for having a false license plate, a fictitious license plate. And he basically told me, he's like, listen, I don't speak English. On Facebook, there's all these ads that you can like buy a plate online. And turns out there's actually a huge scam that was going on in Texas. There's big industry that like, there was like car dealerships that would print plates that were not, that were like fictitious, but they would sell them as legitimate. And they were selling them for the same price it would be to get a registration. It was like 50 or 60 bucks to get one of these plates. So it's not like it was not saving the people money. And this guy who had never gotten even a Texas driver's license, he was a legal permanent resident, he had a Mexican driver's license, he didn't know how the system worked, and he sees this ad in Spanish, I mean, I think navigating the DMV is hard enough, and he sees that, and he goes to a storefront in Houston, a legitimate storefront, and he buys a plate. And he's driving with it, and that's what he's pulled over for, and that's what he's arrested for. And he couldn't take a deal because if he took any kind of deal, there's a chance he would get deported because of the way that immigration, like there's a relationship between if you get a conviction and how you can be then deported, even though he was legally here. But I was very nervous about trying this case because we're in Refugio County, which is a fairly conservative county. This was in 2022, so people are pretty inflamed about the border and an open border and people, invasion of Texas and all that. And I was trying against the prosecutor who grew up in this county and had been there her whole life and was known. When we get to jury selection and they ask, who here knows the defense team, nobody raises their hand. When they ask who here knows the prosecutor, it's like half the panel raises their hand, like half the people in the room. And we go to trial, and this prosecutor was just a bully, an absolute bully. She was vindictive. She name called me before I went to trial. A few weeks before trial, we went back in the judge's chambers, and she called me. She was like, "You came in here. You think you're on your high horse. You think you're better than us. You're just trying to take money from us poor people." The irony of that, of course, is that I'm representing the poor people. She's the one who's trying to prosecute people and put them in jail. But whatever. And she's going on for about 60 minutes on this, and she was just pissed off because she wasn't getting what she wanted, which was a plea deal. And so we go to trial, and she even accused my client during the trial. She's like, "He actually speaks English. I know he does. Yeah, I know he speaks English. Like, he's lying about not speaking English," because she was mad that the county had to pay for a translator. So kind of crazy. But ultimately, the bottom line is this: we won the case. And I don't say that because I think we had obviously a good case. There's a reason why we won it, and the reason why we won it is because you have to prove that he actually knew that this was fake. If he didn't know that it was fake, then you can't be prosecuted for it. And the jury obviously believed that. But I remember that was a really eye-opening moment for me because I had felt like, when she had told me, when she yelled at me, "Oh, you're this outsider, you're down here, you think you're better than us," she knew how to, like, those were points I was sensitive to because I was like, I am not from here. She's right. She's from here. Like maybe I am being kind of on my high horse. And to see that the truth kind of comes out, and that even though people who had known her their whole life went with the outsider, went with the stranger, because that was just the right thing to do, that was what the evidence pointed to, and that they kind of saw her as a bully just as she was I think very affirming, because to me it showed that there is something very sacred about a trial and about a courtroom and about the way what you present in a courtroom and about how truth really is what is on trial more than anything else. Like what happened, what is not even just what happened, what is happening even in this courtroom. Is this woman treating everyone fairly, or is she going beyond what she should be doing. And it turned out that the county roundly did not like her. She just had scared the hell out of everybody. That's the truth. We went to trial again a few months later on another case, and I won again, and she flipped out. But I'm happy to say that she retired 6 months later, or maybe it was a year later. So that was a very, I would say, just affirming experience because it was really difficult. It was challenging as it was happening because to be in that kind of face that kind of adversity, but to see that kind of like other people see that this is a venue where people get to see what's actually happening. This is a public space where we get to decide what's right and wrong, and it's not just that's what a trial is. That was exciting.
I mean, you mentioned some people were pleading. That county had a lot of pleadings, never went to trial. Why do you think some innocent people plead guilty?
Mm. Yeah. It depends. I think that with misdemeanors, they might plead guilty because it is actually more of a hassle to go to court and to fight a case than it is just to resolve it. And so, with Refugio, many of my clients were from Houston because they would drive through, right? And they'd be caught on the highway. That's a 3 hour, 2.5 hour drive. These are people who don't have a ton of money, so they might not have a car that's reliable. These are people who might also already have a conviction for something else that's more serious. And so if you're told you can pay, a few $100 and you don't have to keep coming back to court, which itself is costing, a tank of gas and a day off of work, right? Just from the financial perspective, if you have to take a day off work and you got to pay for gas to do a 6 hour round trip, that itself might be a few $100s that you're leaving, not a few hundred, but $100, $250 you're leaving on the table. If you're told the plea offer is, $400, take a guilty conviction on possession of or driving without a valid license. That was a common case, just not having a valid driver's license, right? Then you take it, even if maybe you had a good reason for not having a valid license, or who knows. With more serious cases, felonies, the range of punishment is so great that if a prosecutor wants to offer a plea deal, I'll just give you a percentage. So let's say you're accused of a crime, serious crime, first degree felony. The punishment range in a first degree felony in Texas is five years minimum if you're convicted to 99 years or life maximum. So if you go to prison, you have you're serving a life sentence. You could serve a life sentence. Let's say you have a 95% chance of winning a trial. Let's say it's a good case. You've got a strong, this is BS, You've got a strong case 19 out of 20 times. You're going to walk free because you didn't do it. But that one time, maybe there's some evidence that a jury could look, and who knows, right? So 5% of the time you're going to be convicted. Of that 5% of the time, you could end up going to prison for the rest of your life. Now let's say the prosecutor comes and says, hey, let's do a plea deal. You have to do 2 years probation. It's hard to say no to that. As a logical human being, just play the odds, just anything. I'm not if you just look at expected value, right? Well, it's like insurance, it's like people, the catastrophe of losing 1 in 20 times and going to prison for the rest of your life can cloud out the other 19 times very easily, right? 2 years probation, okay, well that's not too bad, I can do that, right? I mean ultimately a prosecutor has the ability, when the range of punishment is really great, to offer a plea deal at some level that is going to be difficult to turn down. I mean, a really classic one is time served. This happens all the time. Let's say you've been arrested for a misdemeanor. Let's say you've been sitting in Maverick County Jail for 60 days when you should have been there for 30, and now your case finally gets charged, and the prosecutor says, oh, okay, just time served. We'll plead guilty, you'll get out today, you'll go home. Almost everybody takes that deal because they get to go home, because they don't have to sit in a jail cell anymore. Yeah, maybe we could instead try to get a bond and lower your bond and then fight the case. But A, you're not guaranteed to get that bond. And B, that's time and money and energy. And maybe someone's just like, I just want to get this done with. So and the thing is, Isaac, right? It's difficult to be rational about jail or prison. I don't know about you. I have not personally yet sat in a jail cell. something. It's one of my life goals is to eventually be sitting in a jail cell. I'm not joking. I think that it's important to experience that is ideally contempt of court. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to go commit a crime. But like do something like so badass in the courtroom that the judge is like, you're in contempt, and like I have to sit in jail for a few, whatever. Um, but it warps how you think because you're in a jail cell. It's like having a gun to your head. You know what I mean? Like you can't rationally make a decision when you're sitting in a jail cell. You can't rationally make a decision when you're facing going to life or going to prison for the rest of your life. So we have this system where people choose to plead guilty, which it is a choice, but it's a choice where the other side of it is something that is very difficult for human beings to be rational about, which is jail.
Yeah, I could totally see it, that. Um, do you think Americans understand their constitutional rights today?
Oh, it depends which ones. Well, no, not their rights when they get pulled over by the police. Definitely not those. Uh, they do not. I think that. I mean, most people don't. You go. That's a lot of people go to law school, but like the right that you don't have to talk to the police. I think most people don't understand that you don't have to talk to the police. There's nothing that makes you talk to the police.
Wait a minute. So
Uh,
whenever they tell you give me your license and insurance, you don't have to do anything.
okay. Sorry. That's a good follow-up question. You do have to give, if you get pulled over, you do have to give them your ID and stuff like that. They usually your name. But if they start asking you other questions, you do not have to talk to the police. No, that's your right. Now, they could get, you see, literally there's a law about failure to ID. That is a misdemeanor. If there's a lawful stop. So if they pulled you over for a good reason, then you do have to give them your name. But besides that, you do not need to give them anything other than like license registration. But if they start asking you, where are you coming from? What do you have in the car? Tell me. You do not have to talk to the police.
Now, I've seen a lot of stuff on, I guess, mainly social media, maybe on
Yeah.
YouTube, where you have these guys, they have their windows rolled up, they just put their ID on the side with a little
Oh,
saying, I don't have to say anything else, or, you know what I'm talking about?
I actually, so I don't, but I'm not. Sometimes I'm not on the social media as much as I should be, I guess, to keep up with the times. No, I haven't seen that. So wait. So tell me what they do a little bit. I'm curious about this.
So it's a whole thing of like, you're driving and you're a sovereign citizen, so you don't have to.
Oh.
Is that a whole?
The sovereign citizen thing, I would not recommend because saying that you're a sovereign citizen. To be honest with you, I don't even fully understand that entire shtick. Um, so look, I'm not encouraging people to not talk to the cops if they, that's their choice. But I guess the thing that what I guess I tell people, it's usually the thing that when people ask me like if I have any advice. The advice I have is usually this: if you think you might actually have something to hide, you should not talk to the police, and you should not give them consent to search your car or anything of that nature. And if they will find a way to search that car if they want to, and they will probably arrest you that night because they'll be a little bit upset that you didn't talk to them. But if you can stomach going to jail for a night, you might save yourself a later conviction because you have a right basically. So the Fourth Amendment is what protects us. It protects the police, protects everyone. It's a shield to everybody in the country. Um, to not have the police get in your business unless they have a good reason to. But if you give them all your business without making them doing it, then you kind of give up all of your Fourth Amendment rights. So that's always the kind of big thing that I talk about. And the thing is, the police, they're trained to make you want to talk to them. They get trained to this. This is like they get trained to be like, oh, honesty goes a long way. You'll be better off, and it's really powerful. It's interesting psychologically. Whenever people want to be able to explain themselves, and they want to tell their side of the story, and they think that they can talk themselves out of it. Usually, I would say that's like 95% of the cases when I'm looking at body cam. There's a lot of conversation happening, and it's a human instinct to do that, especially when the person on their side's got a gun and they can take you to jail. But it's not. You don't have to. I guess is the point. And if you really got something that maybe you don't think you should have, then you definitely shouldn't. uh,
Um, what advice would you give somebody that finds themselves with facing criminal charges for the first time ever?
First time ever, yeah. I think the first thing I would do is I would okay, if you're on the scene, do not talk to the police or anybody about your case. That's the very first thing, other than your attorney. So get a lawyer. It could be an attorney that either you retained or you could ask for one if you can't afford a lawyer. But getting an attorney and trying to consult as early as possible with an attorney about what is going on, because I think if you've never been in trouble before, your biggest thing is you're gonna have a lot of confusion. You're gonna have a lot of questions. You're not gonna understand how the system works, and that is again what an attorney does. Is they're the only person in the entire world, actually, literally the entire world, whose like number one priority is your interest in this case, right? Even your family, I'm not saying that they don't like, but your family ultimately isn't bound to have your interests at heart. Your attorney is. They lose their job and their license if they violate these ethics rules. So, like, that is the singular purpose of having an attorney. And especially if you've never been in trouble before, getting that assurance and that security to be able to be guided and talk about it is I think the number one step, because they can kind of help navigate what situation you kind of have and where to go from there. But yeah, that would be my. I mean, shocker. The attorney says get a lawyer, but it's also what I firmly believe.
So you're in several different counties. You're in Maverick County now. What are your goals for Maverick County over the next 5 years, and what does a successful public defenders program look like here?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm really excited about this and about the opportunity to grow this program here. I think that having a robust office that makes sure that people aren't slipping through the cracks is ultimately the most important thing. That everybody is getting an advocate who cares about them and fights for them and is fighting for their humanity. That's like the fundamental goal. And I think for the community more broadly, one of the things that's really exciting about a public defender's office is you now have an institutional office on the other side that gets so much information about the community that's otherwise lost. Because now we have one office that's getting hundreds or maybe 1,000 appointments a year into a segment of the population that, to be honest with you, I think many people don't think about very often, right? Which are people who don't have a ton of money, who are accused of crimes. And what a public defender's office can do is become a really valuable stakeholder in the community, beyond just representing people, but also in terms of translating, like, hey, this is what's kind of going on here. Or this is the kind of people we're seeing. This is the kind of help that's needed. And helping to develop and bridge those resources. One of the things as a larger nonprofit that we're always striving to do is not just sort of stay at the status quo, but how do we improve what representation looks like? And really, the gold standard of representation is you start to bring in other services to help people turn their lives around if they need it. Social workers, people who can connect folks who might be homeless to housing, but a public defender's office really is, in the criminal system generally, it's sort of like the emergency room for social problems. Someone who usually a lot of other things might not have gone right to end up where they are, and in that way we're kind of like the ER doctors that are trying to sort of dress up those wounds. And so when you have an office where you have people who are passionate and caring about this kind of work, that's what you can start to do.
If there's one thing that Maverick County residents should understand about your work, what is that?
I think that this is a deeply empathetic profession. And ultimately, the job of being a public defender is to recognize and share a person's humanity and dignity, no matter what. And that everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what you may or may not have done, deserves that. This might be a little controversial, but I saw a quote that I really liked, which is, if Jesus was a lawyer, he'd be a public defender. And I think that there's a lot to that, because what he did was what he did was to nurse the poor, the folks who didn't have a lot, that were vulnerable, and recognize that no matter what, everybody deserves that recognition of dignity. And so I think that's a really powerful thing. Again, I think that to the other side of how could you represent all of those people, well, that's exactly why we need to represent the people that you're thinking about.
Oh, that's awesome. And can you remind us what other counties is the Texas Rio Grande Public Defenders working on? Besides?
Sure. So we are in 7 counties. So we're in Maverick, Dimmitt, Zavala, and then B County, McMullen County, Goliad County, and Live Oak County. And we're hoping, pending how a few things go tomorrow, that we'll actually be in an additional 4 counties next year: Victoria, Lavaca, Refugio, and Jackson counties. So there's still most counties in South Texas still don't have attorneys. Still don't have public defenders. Or I should say most. A lot. I have that list on my computer saved. I looked at it every day before I go to sleep. Not quite, but and so there's plenty of places to grow and to go, and that's where we plan on being. But first, of course, it's making sure obviously that the office here in Maverick County is off on the right foot, and I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear what the sheriff's office feedback that's what they're telling you. That's good to know.
Yeah, I mean that's what I've heard. David, of course, he's the executive director for Texas Rio Grande Public Defenders. What I know we're kind of getting to the 1 hour mark. We don't want to keep you too much,
Sure.
but what would you like to tell the people of Maverick County directly?
Yeah, well, I would like to, thank you all for welcoming us. I think that it's a really welcoming environment. I think that we've all felt that in the organization. And we're really excited to be here. I see this as an incredible opportunity, especially working in Maverick County. I understand that, right? There was this publicity about, the New York Times article, right? I mean, getting a New York Times doesn't, that's a big deal, right? New York Times article coming around like that. I mean, shoot, I don't think I've had a New York Times article written about me or about, about any county where I've been in, right? So that's a big thing. And I bet I think and that probably doesn't feel great, especially it's like, what's this, what do they know about us, right? Like this kind of big city paper, literally the big city paper coming and telling you what's going on. But what I see is, you know, ultimately what we're trying to do isn't to shame people or anything like that, but it's just to try to make things a little better, so everybody's getting what they deserve. And I think that the opportunity to work in an area that where there's some work that can be done on that is just really exciting, and I'm really thankful for the county for having brought us in, for having submitted the grant to bring us in and to continue to work here and to serve. Frankly, to serve. I mean, that's really what it is. We serve everybody in the county, in this county, in Dimmitt and Zavala, and our office is on 466 Jefferson Street. People are welcome to come by, see it, and we will be here if you ever need us, and hopefully have some nice programming too. For other things like we've been exploring like doing a know your rights training so that way people can learn their rights with some local community partners, but just doing some other things in the community, because I really do think that that's the most important thing is that that's how people see us, is that we are a service to the community, because that's certainly where my heart is.
So just real quick to follow up, you mentioned people knowing what their rights are and everything like that.
Hmm.
So let's say all of a sudden Isaac Reese gets pulled over, gets arrested.
Yeah,
I don't know what to do. I'm indigent. I don't have money to defend myself.
yeah.
What kind of feedback would you give me, or what is it that I need to do?
I would say call me, man. Just call me. Be like, David, I'm pulled over. I'll be like, okay, what's going on? No, I mean, I'm not really joking. But if you're pulled over, again, if you have something that, if you're worried that there might be something not great going on, uh, what I would tell a police officer is you be respectful. Respect is always very important. Be respectful, but just sort of tell them, hey, I've been advised. I've been advised that it'd be best that I don't really want to speak with you. about any further about kind of other than what I have to regarding my license and things like that. If they ask you to search your car, just say no. If they, and everything of that nature. The thing you have to be prepared to do, if that occurs, is that you probably will go to jail that night. You just got to be prepared for that. You got to be prepared for that cost. You got to visualize it in your head that there's a chance I'm going to jail that night. But I promise you, it will help you in the long run because you will have given them less to work with.
So once, let's say, they do take me to jail, I'm
Uh-huh.
sitting there. How do I get in contact with you, or how does that?
Sure. Yeah, so once you're in the jail, I like it. We're walking someone through it. That's great. Once you're in the jail, you're gonna have to go in front of a magistrate, a justice of the peace. They have to do that within a short period of time. Usually, it happens within a day, and they'll give you a bond. They'll tell you what your charges, and they'll give you a bond, and they'll also ask you if you'd like to be represented by an attorney, and if you can afford one. And so you say that you would like to be appointed an attorney, and you'll have to fill out a form that says your financial situation to show that you can't afford one. And then at that point, the paperwork is processed, and that's when you will get a lawyer. Now, that is where, unfortunately, until recently, until we've kind of come in, there just literally haven't been the attorneys to take those cases. And that's why people sat in the jail for so long, because there just weren't the lawyers to take those cases. But that's why we're here, to make sure that that in fact we will be taking the cases. And I will tell you, I mentioned we're not fully staffed, but that's where our priorities right now are specifically those folks, right? The folks that are in custody and need attorneys, because that's where the pressure is the highest. So then we call you, and then we meet with you within 48 hours. An attorney would come meet with you and tell you about what's going on. They would at that point not know a ton about your case, because the case hasn't even been probably gone to the prosecutor yet. But they could tell you about the bond situation, what your bond is set at, how we could try to lower your bond, what sort of the next steps are in the process from there.
Awesome. And then we go to trial. You guys would be representing me, there in front of the judge.
Yeah. Oh, sure. So yeah, the case then would proceed. If if the charges are filed, if the prosecutor goes forward with the charges, then we we get what's called discovery, which is the evidence that the state would have would try to use against you. So usually that's police reports, body camera footage from the officers on the scene, and we do our own investigation, of course, to see what are if there's alternative narratives. The most important thing when we're going through all this, though, is to figure out what it is that you, our client, wants. That's ultimately what this is about, is to have trust and rapport with our client. So it's like, hey, what is it you want? Now, of course, most people say, I want to get the case dismissed. Everybody wants to get a case dismissed, of course. So you can't, that's not always realistic. Just can't, right? That's not always realistic. That's not always going to happen. But, you kind of you build a relationship with your client so you can understand, if this isn't dismissed, do you want to go to trial, or do you want to try to resolve this with a plea negotiation? And if so, what kind of resolution would be one that you could live with? I won't say happy, right? People aren't usually happy to plead guilty, but what's something that you could live with and you can be satisfied with and wake up and not feel like you regret it. And that's, of course, that's what the whole thing's about. That's the relationship you build with your client. That's based on the evidence that you've reviewed, the strength of the state's case, the strength of your own investigation. What are the odds that you think this is going to go to trial? The way I kind of think about it is, it's like in international politics, right? With war, war is like the last result, and diplomacy is like what you try to do if it doesn't go to war. It's like plea negotiations are like the diplomacy, and if that doesn't happen, you go to trial, you go to war. And so you're always thinking, if this goes to trial, who's going to win, right? If this went to war, who's going to win? And that kind of power dynamic, that affects how plea negotiations go, right? And what kind of, what kind of resolution you can come to that might make sense.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you explaining all that, just in case somebody's watching right now or is going to watch in the future. I think that's something they need to be kind of familiar with. So we appreciate that.
Yes.
David, we won't keep you anymore. Is there anything last minute you want to say to everybody out there?
No, I mean, I want to thank you, Isaac, for having me on and for having this podcast and all the work you've done. Isaac is, for those of you who don't know, also works in the grants department for the county and was integral in helping to write the grant that to the state to fund us. So I really appreciate your pushing to, and it's not just our grant, but I know you bring a lot of money to this county with your grants, and to better the community, and not just maybe the more politically the criminal defense lawyers, but also law enforcement grants, and I know for the outdoor spaces, and I'm forgetting, it's like the gym, like you've all across to make sure that the people of Maverick have just great services, and I mean, it's just a really tremendous. I've seen you in action, and I've seen the work you do, and I'm very glad that the county has you working on all that stuff. So thanks for having me on, and thanks for all the work you do.
I appreciate it, David. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it, and we'll catch up again later.
Cool. Talk to you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. All right, guys. So that was David Silberthau. He is the executive director of Texas Rio Grande Public Defenders. So again, they're here in Maverick County right now. They're already ramped up. They're working, and they're helping the indigent defense, people that cannot afford attorneys with misdemeanor felony cases that end up in district courts and county courts that need assistance through their legal system. If you guys end up in any trouble, these guys are here to help you out. If you cannot afford an attorney, make sure you know your rights, and these people are available. It's a great thing to have this. This is something that Maverick County did not have before, and it's something that's very important and critical to, again, your constitutional rights. Thank you. This was Maverick Times Podcast, episode 87, with Talking Public Defense with David Silberthau. We'll see y'all later. Thanks for tuning in.